And I want to welcome everyone. My name is Max Page. I'm Vice President of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and I'm really thrilled there's so much interest in this event, which is the first of three workshops out of the pandemic, building the public school buildings our communities deserve. And the whole idea here is to bring together architects and educators and the wider community to talk about how we repair and build new buildings so that every student, every one of our nearly 1 million public school students has a safe, healthy, green, educationally sound public school building to go to. And I feel especially thrilled when I'm not in the job of a vice president of the MTA. I teach architecture at UMass Amherst, and so this is a wonderful blending, and I'm so pleased that our union, the union of 117,000 educators across the Commonwealth, is joining together with the American Institute of Architects Massachusetts to hold these three sessions as the first of hopefully an ongoing and growing collaboration. Let me just say a couple words, then I want to introduce the president of the MTA, Mary Najimy, and then John Nunnery, the executive director of AIA Massachusetts. And maybe actually, Laura, if you're on this, you can go to the next screen just so you can see the people who are going to be speaking today. We began the conversation, that is the AIA and the MTA, a few months back in the middle of the pandemic, and we realized the great importance of bringing together the two organizations. Look, before the pandemic, our nearly 1 million public school students walked into schools of vastly different conditions. And that means reproducing in architecture the enormous inequality that is unfortunately and tragically, and to our shame, a defining feature of Massachusetts. We are one of the wealthiest states in the nation, and we also have some of the greatest inequality between what the wealthiest have and what the poorest have. Our goal here is to talk about how we rectify that problem. How do we think about both design and funding for schools in this moment in the pandemic that allows us to come out of the pandemic and really achieve finally what we should always have had and what we most certainly can afford in this wealthy state, which is an outstanding public school building and environment for our students. That is the goal. We're starting with this series to bring together architects and educators in the community, but our goal is ultimately to build a wider movement to finally achieve that goal. There are some districts that have some outstanding schools, and you're probably going to see some pictures of those, and others where it's a shame that educators and students are being forced to be educated in unhealthy, environmentally unsound school buildings. So that's the goal here. And I want to turn first to the president of the Mass Teachers Association, my partner in education justice fights, Mary Najimy, a 30-year kindergarten teacher from Concord. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Max. And you can tell by the joy on Max's face that this is his passion. It goes right along with what he has been doing all of his career in public higher education. Welcome. It's 75 people on a school day in a time that's incredibly stressful, and you are hyper-focused on a new context. It's exciting. It's important that you're here because nothing changes without you. So I want to set a broader context about the disparities that we're seeing not only in public education, but in healthcare, in public health, in housing, in food and job and in income insecurity from one community to the next has existed long before COVID, and it's only gotten worse because of COVID. We all know that they're the result of structural racism and the historic disinvestment in the public good. And these disparities aren't only mirrored in public education, but the inequities are intertwined, and they've become even more apparent as we're addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and with the growing power of the Black Lives Matter movement. So why am I mentioning all these different disparities when we're here to talk about school buildings? It's because society is increasingly expecting schools to fix all of the problems caused by policies of austerity and systemic disinvestment in our communities since our government has abandoned us. So we have to talk about the purpose of education if we are going to be the institution that solves society's ailments. We also have to begin to think about what is a community school, as well as thinking about design and funding, as Max just said. I know you're going to hear stories. I want to just quickly tell you a story, a tale of two buildings. It's actually a tale of any school building in Concord Public Schools where I teach, and any number of school buildings in low-income communities and communities of color. It's really the tale of wealth and income inequality right here in Massachusetts. About 15 years ago, the town of Concord started a systemic process of rebuilding all 6 of our public school buildings. So for 15 years, every couple of years, there's construction of a new building. They started with the elementary schools, and of course, every couple of years, the technology gets greener and greener. The spaces become more creative and innovative. And you know, the latest building to be built in Concord was the high school, and it was a $96 million project. And it has open space, it has learning commons, it has solar panels, it has the cutting edge ventilation system. And then 2 years ago, when I became the president of the MTA, and Max and I have been committed as partners to visiting as many schools in as many locals as possible, the stories that we hear that are the same, whether it's Revere or Randolph or New Bedford or Worcester, is that the buildings are mold infested, rodent infested. The indoor air quality is one of the factors that creates the polluted air inside of a building. Fast forward, or lack of drinking fountains or rusty water coming out, sinks that don't work, bathrooms that are not usable. So here we are in the pandemic, and what have we been fighting for since June? But environmental health and safety standards, particularly focused on those very things that have to deal with virus in the air that schools are not capable of dealing with at this very moment. But the new schools in Concord are far more equipped because Concord is a wealthy town and they have made the commitment because they have the money. They can handle the indoor quality in a way that so many of these other districts can't. So here we are today, thinking about what this fight to only return to buildings, hashtag only when it's safe, has really done for us. Is we've been laying the foundation for never, ever returning to sick buildings. And the direction forward, us coming together and reimagining and reinventing the purpose of school and the kinds of buildings we need to create to meet those purposes of schools, also is about the Green New Deal. It's also about a just recovery. Investing in the infrastructure, rebuilding schools is a way to it's a vehicle to restart our economy when all we're hearing these days is there's not enough money. We refuse to tax the rich. We're not going to dip, Baker's latest is we're not going to dip into the rainy day fund and we're losing $700 million to the budget. We can't tolerate that. Our job as unionists, each and every single one of you has the power to dream. We dream collectively, and then we act together to bring our dreams to fruition. So this 3-part series will be very exciting. It is going to be the place where we can do some dreaming. And then through the MTA, that's our vehicle to make the change so that we do have the school buildings that our communities deserve. So enjoy tonight's program, and we are looking forward to being in conversation with you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks so much. Let me turn now to John Nunnery, the Executive Director of American Institute of Architects, Massachusetts chapter.
Thank you, Max. I want to just talk a little bit, and I'm going to be very brief, just about who is AI in Massachusetts, why is the Mass Teachers Association reaching out to this group, and what do we do, and I'll turn it over to Laura and Pip really to talk a little more about what we as architects find as we design and build and renovate schools across the state, and they will talk to the experiences that they've had and others. I will just focus on who we are and what we do. So the American Institute of Architects was founded in 1857 by 13 architects. Today, AIA represents more than 95,000 members, which represent more than 200,000 US jobs. Our headquarters are in Washington, DC, and we have more than 200 chapters around the world. In 1963, the state chapter of the American Institute of Architects, the AIA Massachusetts, was established, and today represents over 5,000 architects, design professionals, and allied members statewide. Our state chapter is comprised of 3 local components, which are the Boston Society of Architects, which is our Eastern Mass chapter. You can think of that as basically everything east of Worcester County. Our Central Mass chapter, which essentially is Worcester County, and our Western Mass chapter, which obviously would be everything west of Worcester County. For more than 160 years now, the members of AIA have worked to advance our quality of life through design. And from designing the next generation of energy-saving buildings to making our communities healthier and more vibrant, architects work to turn dreams and aspirations into reality. Now, that being said, decisions made by federal, state, and local lawmakers can have an effect on the way architects practice. And AIA Massachusetts works to serve its members by being the voice of the profession to those decision makers at the state and federal level. We represent our constituencies, or our constituency, on a range of issues, including livable communities, historic preservation, accessibility, procurement. As it relates to today's conversation, school modernization and construction. We're also involved in urban renewal, brownfield redevelopment, infrastructure security, building code adoption, energy, transportation, business, tax, and economic policy. We are heavily involved with the state legislature on issues that are concerned to our profession. We advocate for stronger designer selection laws. In 2002, we helped the state with a pilot program exempting public school projects, specifically some school projects, from the file sub-bid system as a way to see if that would save cost. We are members of the 2004 Construction Reform Commission, and we were the co-authors of the CM at Risk laws that are now in place. CM at Risk is a procurement method used to select contractors and help build schools. And probably most importantly, we helped the Senate craft the actual statutes that govern the Mass School Building Authority as it exists today. We've gotten involved in other issues like the Community Preservation Act. We've helped recapitalize the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund and get funds for historic preservation tax credits. So those are just a few of the legislative issues that we've gotten involved in. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Max, which I believe is going to go over to Laura to talk a little bit more about what architects see in the state as it relates to equity across our school building stock here in Massachusetts.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks so much. I want to just quickly say what we're going to be up to, and then I want to do 2 quick polls. So here's the agenda. That in a moment, Laura Wernick and Pip Lewis from HMFH will give a presentation or thinking about school quality and the inequities in schools. Then we'll have a breakout. So they're really a chance for educators, community, and there are also legislators on here, which is terrific, and architects to talk about our goals for our schools. What we love about our schools, what are the problems we're faced with, and the like. A brief report back, and then we're going to look forward to a brief summary of the next two sessions. And again, those are on October 8th and October 15th, same time, for on the 4 to 5:30 each of those days. So let me just do a quick poll. Some of you have done this in Zoom. In a minute, you'll see something just will pop up in your screen. You'll be able to choose an answer, just to get a sense first of where people are coming from. So I'm going to launch this poll, which asks, what kind of school district do you live or work in? Urban, suburban, rural / small town? Let's just get a sense of that. So I'm actually going to launch this now, and we'll give ourselves a 20-30 seconds just to answer those. All right, so here's the results. You see, pretty much divided between suburban and urban, with a little smaller group from the rural and small town areas. We have a nice mix of people, either who are educators there, or architects, or community members, or legislators. So let me do one other one, if I can see if I can figure out how to do this. So this is the second one, is asks about sort of your just general sense or your professional knowledge of what are the conditions of your city or town's schools. And so you'll see it'll be just good to get a sense of that. So I'm going to launch that now and give us about 30 seconds to fill that out. All right, so here you can see the results. So there are, just under 10% of the people say all the schools are in great condition. But not surprisingly, even in many middle class, even upper class districts, there's lots of schools that are, they're pretty good, but there's still issues. And here we have 43% of people said there were some really terrible conditions in schools. And I will say, even in my town of Amherst, I don't know how you want to characterize it, but upper middle class district, some of our schools are really hurting, and we're desperately in need of new ones or repaired ones, and those conditions are much worse in other places. So that gives a sense, I think, of how dire this question is for a large number of communities. All right, let me now turn it over to Pip and Laura to give a kind of presentation about the work that they've done and they've been thinking about. So take it away.
Okay, well, this is Pip Lewis, and I'm very pleased to be here with my partner, Laura Wernick, who is doodling on the slides. We're very happy to be here.
I'm not sure how that happened. I didn't do that. It appeared on my slide. I'm not sure how to get rid of it either.
Yes, I was going to, with all the teachers in the room, I was going to take a ruler and slap your knuckles. But that's certainly fine. I need to get rid of the poll in front of me. Can you go back to the first slide? Yeah. I wanted to say that, well, first of all, about the polls, it'd be interesting to see if there's any correlation between the pretty good schools and suburban schools and urban schools and poor quality schools. I'd just be curious to see if there is any correlation at all there. This conversation between Laura and myself and other people in our firm really started with the murder of George Floyd, as it has, frankly, for so many people across the country. And we as a firm sort of began struggling to understand, you can leave it until I tell you to change it a bit, struggling to understand what the inequities of this world that we were operating in. And we thought it was reasonable for us to focus on what we know and what we do. And because we're architects, we design schools. That's sort of what we have been focusing on. The inequities that exist in the schools in Massachusetts that we work on and what we can do about them. The role of the school in a community is, of course, very important and very varied. One of the most basic thing, of course, is this educational vehicle where the young can learn, of course, mature, and importantly, visualize and aspire to the future roles that they will take as adults in this society, in their community, both professionally and socially. And so what the experience that they go through in school, I think, has a very important, is a very, very important building block for building the adults of the future. And in addition to that, a school is an important icon, a source of pride to the community. When you visualize your town, sometimes you visualize the school or the high school as the symbol of the community. And as Mary pointed out, with Concord schools, the $96 million high school, the schools are also frequently the biggest financial investment that a community will make. The schools are also a very important community center in various ways, both for the students and for the whole community. They provide frequently recreational facilities for everyone in the community. They provide sports teams to rally around, and they provide facilities in which to have town meetings, elections, bake sales, etc. But we have seen that the roles of schools differ greatly by community. And we find that in many minority communities and lower income communities, in addition to the roles that I just talked about, they're very important centers for providing things that may be missing in that community. They act as warming and cooling shelters in times of high heat and cold winter when people's homes aren't providing adequate services. They can be very important health facilities. Maybe sometimes we've worked with schools where they provide dental, eye screening facilities, hearing services, because they know that that's the only place that the students in the school will get those facilities. And they also provide other sorts of community resources that may not be available elsewhere and may be available in other communities. A library that may be accessible to the public, other sorts of meeting facilities and community services. But one of the things that we really saw during COVID is that the schools are, particularly in low-income communities, are very important for food security. And as hundreds of thousands of students were let out of school in March as the COVID crisis hit, people understood that they were going to lose receiving that 1 or 2 square meals that may be the only square meals they receive a day. So a lot of communities had to really hustle to figure out how to continue to serve their students. You can change the slide to the next one. There's one before that, Laura. As I've worked as an architect doing schools in Massachusetts for about 30 years, I've become sort of aware that there are really extreme inequities, as Mary said, between different communities. And the inequities are sometimes based on urban versus suburban, sometimes low income versus wealthier communities, sometimes minority communities versus white communities. But each of those criteria sort of pressure a school in different sorts of ways. One of the main things that we see, and I've been fortunate to work in some of the wealthier communities in Massachusetts, Lincoln, Wellesley, Brookline, but also working in Boston and Brockton, is that we see an amazing difference in the amount of space available. And space limits the services that you can provide in a school. On the left, you see a suburban school that we did with a large campus running track, soccer field, softball diamond. And on the right, you see a school in Boston that obviously is right up to the sidewalks and has no outdoor play space for the students in the school. Everything, all the activities in the school go within the walls. Change, please. Another thing that we have found makes a big difference is the age of the facilities and whether or not the facilities, even if old, have gone through major renovations, and they frequently have not. And so here I'm contrasting, and I'm using some strong contrast just for to really illustrate my point. But I'm contrasting a library in a new school that we've done in Brookline, the Ridley School, with a school that we are working on in Boston. Now, the good part of the slide on the right is that these people are about to get a completely new school facility. So this story will change for them significantly soon. But the city of Boston, for instance, has 125 schools, some of which are in much better shape than this one. Some are about the same shape. It's very hard to work through all of those schools to provide facilities that are equitable to what the people in very nearby Brookline are seeing in their schools. We know that a big question is whether the schools have been renovated or maintained over the years. And this is a school that was built in 1913 and really has not seen a major renovation since. All the toilets are down in the basement, and there's no elevator. It's a 5-story high facility. And again, fortunately, this one will be replaced, so the story is better than it looks. But as you go through Boston, you go through Lynn, you go through several other cities, you find other difficult stories like this. Has money been available, resources been available to maintain the schools, to provide updated technology, and to provide resources like libraries and decent facilities? I was really surprised as I started working in Boston to find out that many of the Boston public schools don't have libraries. This particular school they're working with doesn't have a library and doesn't have a gymnasium. It's very poor science facilities, and the headmasters from the school and the teachers are really working like real heroes in order to provide a decent education in spite of the facility that they're in. But we're architects. We try to change those facilities. We want to talk, Laura will talk now about some of the goals we see in our strive to improve schools in Massachusetts.
So Pip kind of covered some of the challenges that we face. As Pip said, we're a firm that focuses on education, and we really try and every community has its own challenges, every community has its own goals, but as a baseline, when we're designing schools, we're trying to make good places for learning that are safe, that have good quality light and visibility, that are flexible so that teachers can teach in different ways, that have a variety of learning spaces so kids can learn in different ways, that where furniture is flexible and can be moved around easily, and buildings that are engaging, that create a sense of place where both educators and students want to be. We try and make healthy spaces so that where there's lots of connections to the out of doors, both visually and physically, with good acoustical qualities and good indoor air qualities. These are all things, all goals that we have when we're starting to design. We also want our schools to be, to benefit the families and the communities. They're community centers. They're used by everyone in the community. They should be a place where families are comfortable coming in. Now during COVID, obviously that's not that's not happening. But our goal is certainly to make places that are welcoming to families and our community spaces. We want our schools to have places that support food security. It's easy for students to have access to good food and don't feel that in somehow getting food through school is shameful. We work very hard to make our schools environmentally friendly with low energy use. We're now designing schools that are actually creating more energy than they use, and they're creating more power than they use, so that we can be giving energy back to the grid. So these are all things that go into thinking about putting schools together, whether we're designing new or renovating. How do we make sure that all of our schools achieve this, and at the same time that they're equitable, that every school that we do has the same benefits and the same potential for the educators and for the students within them. And what we found, and what Pip started to articulate, I think, very clearly, was that in some of the poor communities, and certainly in some of the urban communities, there are specific challenges.
So I think just if I pick up with what Laura was saying, we find that there are really particular challenges finding good sites as we work in urban areas around the state. And as we know, the poor communities tend to be communities that have the poorest air quality, may have hazardous soils from previous industrial uses and things like that, and also may have significant environmental noise. I've just lost the image. I think we lost Laura.
It looks like we lost Laura. Once she signs back in, I'll be able to get her back into this meeting.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I don't know if we can wait, or if you're able to finish up what she was.
Yeah, I think I can finish up without the images. Although, yeah. So now is this Laura back, or?
I think
no, it's me. It's Erica.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So I was using sort of as an example with that slide the site that we, after almost literally 10 years, have found to work for the school that I showed you some pictures of toilets and things like that of earlier, to replace that school. And the good news is that the city of Boston is building schools now. They have 5 school buildings that are either have recently opened or are in the pipeline and will open.
So I'm back. I guess I got.
Years. Okay. I took over for you, Laura.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Laura, you're back on.
Yeah.
I went much faster than Pip did. I didn't realize I was off, and I was already on another slide. Did you finish? So let me go on.
Yeah, I finished that, and then I just want to go to the very next slide.
To which slide? I'm sorry.
Oh, just one more slide. And I wanted to say that the city of Boston is building schools. They've built, there are 5 schools that have recently finished or in the pipeline, which is fantastic. But when I show the very small site that we're building the Quincy Upper School on, it's actually not unusual for the city of Boston schools. And so here's a couple of little sort of figure ground pictures of 2 of the sites, Boston Arts and Boston Arts Academy near Fenway Park, and the Quincy Upper School in the Chinatown area. And each is being built on a site less than an acre. These sites are too small for any exterior outdoor recreation space at all. Unfortunately, with each of these buildings, we have been able to get some outdoor educational space onto the roof of the building. but you have an incredible lack of green space because of the lack of space. The very small sites, zero lot line sites, frequently result in higher construction costs for various reasons. There's no laydown space. The contractor has to lease property nearby to use as staging areas and things like that, and offices. This all raises the cost of building in urban environments. And when the space is tight, it puts pressure on the ability to provide certain facilities within the school. Each of the Boston schools have had really a challenge trying to get just a full-size gymnasium compared to what other schools are doing across the state of Massachusetts. So the schools also, because they're in urban areas where families frequently don't have access to the sorts of resources, other facilities and things like that, that some of our wealthier towns do, they really do rely on these schools for the things I mentioned before: health screening facilities, food security, et cetera. And that really leaves us with this sort of final question before we go to the breakout rooms, is how can we think more systematically about using the design of public schools to address historic, economic, and racial inequities?
Great, thank you, Pip and Laura, for that great presentation. That sets the stage, and we really want to give a chance for all the participants to have a conversation, to be in conversation between community educators and architects. So we want to go now into breakout sessions for 15 or 20 minutes to address these questions. And you're going to be hosted by either or both an architect and an educator to go through these conversations. And we'll kind of record some of these, and then after 20 minutes, come back and report out some of the key takeaways. Not everything, but all the key takeaways. So, Inez, I think you're going to give me the signal that it's okay to do this.
It is okay.
And one of the big things that came up was the balance between kind of larger consolidated schools with respect to staff, especially specialists, and the economies of that versus in a post-COVID environment, having smaller, more flexible, simpler, more manageable schools where we can open windows and have a little more flexibility, and that you wouldn't have to shut down, if you had to shut down a school, it wouldn't impact as many people. So I think a lot of the things that came out were about this balancing act between economies of scale and kind of safety, security, and health, and how those things play out.
Great, thanks, Karen. Another UMass Amherst Architecture Department person, Dory Brooks, do you want to quickly just say what, if you would let a group?
Sure. I'd say if I could pull one point out, we shared those things that we appreciate about access to outdoors and natural light, those types of things. But I think another thing that I see as a sort of a thread is people thinking about how the school relates to a sense of community. The importance of a space within a school that allows community to come together, but also at the other end of the spectrum, the school being an expression of community in some way, and in a way that community is truly engaged in relating to and defining the school, and that requires kind of a deep engagement in the process. And then, the importance of spaces within schools that allow people to interact with each other. That's something I think we're all particularly missing right now. So that jumps out as a very interesting element here.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Dory. Debbie McCarthy, I hope you're still on, educator from Hull. Do you want to just say what your group mainly focused on?
Yes, I will highlight one of the major talking points was that the structure and the services need to go hand in hand. For example, in Hull, I have one of the most beautiful libraries. It overlooks Boston Lighthouse. The building was renovated maybe 10 years ago, but we don't have a librarian. And even though there was a renovation project that increased the size of the structure, there wasn't the investment in the facilities and the maintenance staff. So that even the most wonderful of designs needs to also have the investment in services.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. And I think that also goes back to one of the points that Pip was talking about some that some of our less well-resourced districts also have less space. So for the kinds of activities, the kinds of uses, functions that we would like to have in schools are simply not possible in some. But I also want to lift up, because this came up in our group, the issue of, having the buildings, but where's the people? Where are the educators? I've seen, no doubt, since we've lost over 100 librarians across our schools, even before COVID, you have libraries that are staffed by volunteers, not a professional librarian. Absolutely an issue. Let's just do one or two more. Larry, were you helping to run one, Larry?
Yeah, thanks, Max, and greetings all. We had a relatively small group and turned out to be a fair number of professionals, which was kind of an interesting mix from what I had expected. But nevertheless, the few folks who were coming from the educationer side started off by talking about new buildings and the wonderful nature of a couple of buildings they were familiar with. And yet we sort of pivoted to thinking about some of the older buildings and some of the wonderful qualities about those buildings, and the sort of vintage classic buildings where you have large windows and operable windows, and some of those things have much of the nice daylighting and connections to the outside and the high ceilings that we are beginning to appreciate more in the world of COVID-19. So it was kind of an interesting discussion. I think we focus more on sort of the very specific nature of the buildings than perhaps some of the others.
And I will just underscore that as someone who teaches historic preservation, I appreciate the emphasis on using these often very, imposing and impressive, well-built historic buildings that we say, oh, they're falling apart, et cetera. But often it means that the community hasn't had the funds to maintain them or update them, even though the bones are quite strong of those buildings. I think that's an important point as well. Patrick Patterson, one of our members, retirees from the Andover area. Do you want to summarize maybe, or hit the high notes from your group?
One of the things which was emphasized was, the importance of nature. The school needs to be integrated in some way so that the students can basically use nature in terms of their curriculum, but also use nature in the sense of their experience of it. Obviously urban settings are at a disadvantage, but there are spaces within the urban set in terms of like the construction. One person made the point that the concrete, spaces need to be torn up, stuff needs to be planted, things like that. And also the other thing was, what about basically holding class outside, even during winter? Designing the outdoors in such a way that it can be basically used out during the winter, things like that. And finally, the main one we actually came back to is basically, how are we going to do all this? Funding issue is of paramount importance in terms of trying to basically pay for all this. You mentioned the fact that there are no librarians in libraries. This is happening across the board, in terms of cutbacks and things like that.
So I thank you, Pat. That's almost like a softball to me, in the sense that one thing we need to be clear about in all these discussions this week and in the coming weeks is that the one fortunate thing is that we live in a state where money is no object. And now you make me like, what do you mean? I mean, the money actually exists somewhere in the Commonwealth, we are a wealthier Commonwealth than we have ever been. And I mean, even now, amidst the pandemic. The problem is that far too much of it is in private hands and is not in the public coffers to be able to have librarians and fix up schools that are falling apart. So that's part of the agenda, is also building a kind of a movement to say, wait a second, this is just wrong. We actually have the money in this Commonwealth. We just need to draw it into the public coffers and then allocate it to where it belongs. I'm looking at the time, and I really am a firm believer that we end on time. What I'd love, if Laura, if you're still on, if you're able just to put up the last slide in the presentation. I don't know if you can share again, Laura Wernick. I want to just preview.
I don't know if it may be that it's easier for Erica to bring it out.
Okay, maybe Erica, if you're able to do that, and then we just want to give a quick
Is Erica, you still around?
preview to the next. Erica's still here. Yep, I think she can probably pull that off. And we'd just like to do a very brief preview. First, I'd like to that if you have not signed up for the other two sessions, and most people actually did, but that's the URL. I'll post it again. I think I earlier posted it in the chat, and I'll do that again. But I'll ask first Erica, who just posted it, if you'd talk briefly kind of about the issues that will come up in the next session. And I know this is the centerpiece of your impressive research work.
Hi, everybody. So if you don't know me, I'm Dr. Erica Etland. I'm at Perkins and Will now, but before I just graduated from the Harvard School of Public Health, where I focused on how K-12 school buildings influence students' health, thinking, and performance. And so there's actually an incredible body of literature that is out there. There's studies that are sort of telling us how do acoustics, air, light, all of these components influence day-to-day function. And I think in the era of COVID, it's becoming increasingly important. However, on top of that, there's sort of this very important discussion about equity. And so as much as we talk about outdoor environmental justice, I think there's some really clear indoor environmental justice issues that, Pip was able to visualize, but that also the research and the data speak to. And I think one thing, and I'm gonna just say it because I think it's important, from our group was, we had an incredible teacher who sort of spoke up and said, we had a brand new school building, and yes, there are bigger windows, but we have glare, we have other important issues that prevent us from using that space as effectively as possible. So what this means is that we have good research that has been done, but there's important stuff to continue to do as we move forward. And so I will sort of share what I think are key components, that it's not just about having access to windows and views, but really those deeper questions that help us ensure that the schools that we build today are actually as beneficial and useful, say 50, 60, 80 years from now.
Great. Thank you, Erica, so much. And I would say, just to underscore, one of the goals of this collaboration is frankly to have the educator voice, both educator voice be heard in this with architects, but also in town debates. And I think we have a longer term goal of really helping to educate our members and our locals so that people feel more confident about voicing what they know about how a good school building functions and a good classroom works. So the last person I just want to speak briefly is Dory Brooks about that third session on October 15th.
Sure. So on the last session, Max and I will both be handling this, but it's not useful to just kind of dream and not get to the reality of how you achieve anything. So what we want to do is try and educate as much as we can about the process through which schools are funded in Massachusetts, understand the legislative background to that, and try and imagine how all the forces that are happening around us might actually be kind of engaged with the legislature to reconsider some of that legislation, see where it might go in the future as a result of COVID, as a result of the inequities that we all see are becoming kind of distressing in society as a whole. So we'll talk at that level and try and also empower you as teachers in your own communities to be able to help your districts try and think about these things. We know that part of the inequities that we see are a result of different districts having different levels of capacity to address their own schools' needs internally, to figure out how to make an application to the state, how to bring some strong local voices to the school building committee. And those things all actually end up having a huge amount of impact. So we hope to answer your questions on that and kind of do some big picture thinking to see where this might go in the future.
Great. No, thank you, Dory. And that's exactly, just want to emphasize that we want to, in that last session, really understand the system, the way it can be changed in the near term, and also how we might want to crack it and start over or think of dramatically new ways of doing business on school buildings. Because at the pace we're going right now, it'll take many centuries to provide every student with the kind of school building that they deserve. So let's work. We'll talk about the system as it is, how it can be tweaked, and also how it can be changed even more fundamentally. So just final things, I again put the link in there. Please share that widely for the next sessions, and the next one will be next Thursday from 4 to 5:30. As you can see, we've been recording, so we will hopefully by then be able to, or before, we'll be able to post that and share that so you can share either, use it with your constituency, your group, your town, your local, and we will also make the PowerPoint available. All right. I really want to thank you all. This is great. This is a great start to this, what we hope to be a wonderful collaboration that will lead to important changes for public schools, near term and long term. So good night, and we'll see you next week.
Very much, Max. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you very much.